Hello, everyone. Welcome to day 4 of week 1. Today, we are going to continue our conversation about motivation. Yesterday, in day 3, we focused on part 1 of motivation, which is more about fleeting motivation. So quickly changing our emotional state using something called transient motivation in order to overcome some kind of immediate hurdle. Today, we're going to focus on something that I find to be more valuable in the long term, and something for me that is more sustainable, hence sustainable motivation. And because it's sustainable motivation, I also find that it's more true to who I am. It's less of a hack, and it's more of a tapping into my genuine self, which thereby increases motivation considerably more than the transient motivation. And you may find that this is the case for you as well. And as I said at the beginning of the program, different things work for different people at different degrees. So perhaps your experience using these things will be different than mine, and you may find that transient motivation is actually better for you. But let me cover sustained motivation, and it's really about using that M part of that behavior formula and amplifying it by driving what's at the core of us. And these are the different types of sustained or sustainable motivation that I will emphasize today, and I'll cover each of them to different degrees. So first, let's talk about freedom and control and commitment. We are going to apply a framework to help us to understand this particular sustained motivation a little bit better. And this framework is derived by something called Lifebook. This is a program over at Mindvalley that looks across your entire life and helps you to bring clarity to the different roles that you play or you want to play in your life. And we'll be using a little bit of this framework specifically to help us to understand what these concepts mean and allow us to move it from a concept to something practical, something actual, something real. In general, I always find that when we talk about a concept, we need to make it real for those around us to understand. And that's something that I'll go into a little bit further in the communication week, which will be towards the end of the program. So what this framework, which is focused on belief, vision, why, or the why, and in the strategy, and going through these steps help us to move a concept like freedom, self-control, and commitment into something practical. So as we walk through this framework, you'll get a sense of the concept on this topic and then the application of it. I will not walk through or apply this framework to every type of sustainable motivation. I will do a little bit on the implementation side of each of the applications. So it's up to you if you want to use this framework to help further define these different types of motivations for yourself. So let's apply this framework on the aspect of freedom, commitment, and control as a sustained form of motivation. So first, what does it mean? What's the belief? Well, number one, beliefs are powerful. Beliefs are the hardest thing to change in someone. So you can either work to change the belief or our own belief, or to leverage it in some way to help us to get the outcome. So these are the questions that you can ask of yourself to help to really get clear about what your beliefs are. So what do you believe? What foundational beliefs do you hold in this area, and this area is specific to the commitment, control, and freedom concept that we'll go into. How do these beliefs shape things? So specifically in this example, your career, how are the beliefs empowering? So you can see empowering, motivation, they're connected. And do they motivate? And do they motivate at a deep level? So again, the core, this can help you to tap into the core and to use that motivation to drive the behaviors in yourself and also in others as well. There's a little bit of a typo here, but what the last question asks is around like, are there beliefs you want to create that you don't have, that you feel that you're lacking? So let's apply this. Some example beliefs for this concept of leveraging self-control, freedom, and commitment to drive motivation, to increase the M. So here are some of beliefs. Here are some of the beliefs that I've outlined for myself. I'll read them here. So the only thing in life I control is myself. I do not control how others feel, think, or act. When I apply a great sense of depth to controlling myself, that control gives me the greatest freedom. I am a master of my own destiny. I'm taking control there. I'm taking control of the things I can control. Options are not freedom. Earlier on in my life, I thought freedom was all about a set of infinite options that at any point in time I can jump to. But actually, I've learned that commitment is the real freedom for me. Commitment eliminates the options and it helps me to develop strong bonds with the things I choose to bond with. And making a choice frees me from the unknown of those other options, and it empowers me to build something from my commitments. So committing to a single choice is one of the greatest exercises of self-control for myself. And the control and commitment allows me to claim a small yet infinite spot of the universe as my own. Like the universe, from my point of view, is infinite. And really the only thing I can control is myself. And if I aspire and work towards mastering that, that is the true freedom that I can have. And that does not mean I always have every option on the table. It's about committing to something, and whether it succeeds or fails, I went down that path. And what is the value that going down that path create? What did it create? Did it create some kind of outcome that's going to help me? And how does it help me? Is it knowledge, or is it something that can be used and provides value for myself and others? Let's move on to the next part of the framework, the vision. So what is a vision? It's the desired future state that we have for ourselves or something else. It refers to that ideal state, that ideal future state that we would like to achieve. And it could be scoped by certain areas. So some questions that you can ask to help to identify what a vision, that future state, ideal future state would be for you. How do you want this area of your career to feel? What do you want it to look like? What do you want to be doing on a consistent basis? Like what kind of habits do you want to be doing in this vision? It helps you to clearly describe your ideal vision. Now, let's take that from concept to something practical. And this is an example from my experience. So my vision in this area is that I have full mastery over the things within my control. I move on from thoughts, feelings, and action and people that are outside of my control. I got to let that stuff go. That's the future state that I want. My control over myself and the commitments I make give me the discipline to shape the career and the life that I want. My life and career, they're going to throw challenges at me, but it is within my control to determine how I act. And that is one of the greatest sources of contentment that I have. And let me just take a moment here to stop and talk about contentment versus happiness. And I know that They may be the same thing to most, but to me, they're not the same thing. Like happiness to me is like a high. It is a short-lived emotional state. It is a buzz. It is something that I might get from playing my guitar or playing a song with a band, and it was just a really great, like exhilarating experience. Contentment is a more sustained positive feeling, a higher equilibrium. Perhaps it's not the bursts of excitement, but overall, the average is more of an even keel of positivity. And for me, my vision is that these beliefs are in this area help me to achieve contentment. Moving on to the next part of my vision in this area, it's that my emotions are a support to my actions, but they do not drive my actions. So building upon this, a concept that I integrated into how I work is I have this concept of benching myself. So if I'm just completely getting to a place where I feel like I cannot exert some type of control over myself, the only thing I'll say to myself is just sit down and wait, sit down and wait. Because I'm giving myself time to calm down and then to be very thoughtful and have the freedom to make the choice and commitment that I want to in terms of the action that I want to take. In my own personal ideal state in this area, I'm going to understand that times that I will lose control, as I just said, of my emotions. And when this occurs, there we go. Talking about benching myself, I will not act on that, and I will wait until I constructively use my emotions to my benefit. And then finally, my self-control and commitment are shaped ultimately by my values and are in service of my purpose. And I'll briefly talk about values and purpose in just a moment. All right, next application of the framework, the why. So the why refers to that compelling reason behind what we want in this area. So what ultimately drives me in this area? What energizes me to take action? What is going to motivate me to achieve my vision? And how can I describe what I want to make the most out of this area for specifically my career? And here's an example of that. So for me, there is a great pride and satisfaction and a lack of regrets knowing I left everything on the table, and that control and commitment ensure that this is always the case for me. So sometimes I'll ask my questions about a certain situation or decision, especially ones in which I feel high anxiety. And I'll say to myself, Jason, if you don't do this, will you regret this for the rest of my life? And if the response to that is yes, I know what I need to do, and I have to work to overcome that anxiety. So more wise in this area for me. I believe that God gave us all the ability to exist in multiple ways. Some people can focus on faith or spirituality. There's a multitude of definitions of God, and whether God is the universe, or God is an individual, or God is many, or God is none. Spirituality can be a powerful motivator, or you can use a different method of why in any given area. So for me here, emotion, intelligence, and spirituality they're major components for me. And when one of those things is out of balance, for me, the others suffer. So control and commitment allow me to keep those things in balance. Another motivating or why factor for me is that using my emotions as a tool versus my emotions using me as its tool enables me to move others and myself, and allows me to contribute to the lives of others. Being an example of commitment and control is a better example for my family, friends, colleagues, and society. Like aspiring and living this example is very important for me. And I feel like currently there are just too many examples of people focusing on driving in balance And that doing so creates a wedge between people. I don't want to be that kind of example, and I don't want to leverage these skills or these abilities or this area to do that. And then finally, at times in my career, I feel dependent on things that I have no control over. But when I assess the situation, I will always find the solution within my control that I can commit to. And that is a liberating experience and makes me feel that I am the master of my own destiny. All right, so we went top level beliefs, like things that are just inherent in us that are difficult to change. How can we leverage those things? Then we move to vision. So what are our beliefs? And then what's that ideal future state? And how might our beliefs get us to that future state? And then we talked about along the way, what's going to keep us going? What's going to keep us going? And strategy is more about being prescriptive in terms of the steps that we're going to take that leverage our beliefs, that help us get towards our vision and leverage our motivation. And questions to ask in this area to help identify your strategy is, what are the positive habits and attitudes and actions that I can implement in service of my motivation and beliefs to get to realize my vision? And then what are the steps required for the vision that I want to create? So essentially the same thing. These are the prescriptive steps to get there, leveraging those other things. And ultimately, you may look at these things that you can potentially do and understand what is really going to excite you. So again, this is complementary to that whole behavioral formula, that juxtaposition of motivation and accessibility with a prompt. This taps into more of that motivation side as well. So what does this concept look like in practicality via an example? So for me, when I am struggling with a problem or assessing an opportunity, things that I will do, I will write a list of 10 relevant things that I can control. And then I will write a list of 10 relevant things that I do not control, and look at like how much time and energy I'm wasting on those relevant things outside of my control. You know, there's consequences for that. I could be losing an opportunity. There's opportunity costs there. I could be directly losing something like my time, or potentially my money, or potentially the alignment of my team or the faith of my team and me. And then what I will do is I will view the relevant things within my control as assets. So what I control are my assets, and determine how I will use them to solve the problem. So things within my control are available resources to me. How am I going to deploy those resources to solve the problem versus the more difficult challenge of trying to control things or other people's resources? Can I create a solution that is completely within my control, thereby making the solution easier and more accessible, and will thereby also likely motivate me more to exhibit the behaviors to accomplish the aspiration? And then finally, focusing specifically on this area, making a commitment to those relevant things within my control that solve the problem or realize the opportunity by actioning them and eliminating other options. So making that commitment, understanding which direction I'm taking, being free from those other options, and just moving forward and taking action versus being stagnant and still wondering what I should be doing. So the next type of sustainable motivation that we're going to talk about is intrinsic motivation and how that connects to authenticity. A few minutes ago, I gave my point of view on contentment, and that's also important here as well. So People describe this in different ways. Intrinsic motivation is just no matter what role you have, whether when I was a designer, when I first started my career, or now that I'm a chief operating officer, no matter what role I play, I will always like default to a certain way of working because that just makes me feel good. And I feel good when I work in that way, and it feels effortless. Some people describe this as being in a flow state, that when you work, like your time quality is so high that you don't even notice the time quantity. So time just like flies by. It's that whole concept. And I've wrote some notes here that I'm quickly going to read just to give you some more depth in this area. Like, why is the work effortless? And that's because, you know, we're intrinsically motivated to do the work, and when we've had like no sense of protecting and defending or hiding or proving ourselves. And this protecting, defending, hiding, or proving ourselves, that's the concept of authenticity. So when we're feeling authentic, this is also intrinsically motivating for us. And when it's tied to how we work and how we feel about working, those two things really help to leverage intrinsic motivation. And when I'm indexing for this kind of emotional state in my work, I will cultivate that occasional happy high that I spoke about earlier into this consistent, like, slow buzz of contentment. So that higher level of positivity, achieving it consistently with maybe less of these extreme bursts. And again, this plays into motivation. So working in these states provides a higher degree of satisfaction and health than working in constant stress states, right? So, stress isn't an indicator of productivity. You can use stress to motivate. That's not a sustainable form of stress. That could be a function of like the pain side on when we talked about the heaven and hell way of transient motivation. But again, that is not sustainable, and it's really not satisfying. And frankly, like, high stress states are not healthy and will diminish your motivation and accessibility over longer periods of time. However, tapping into this kind of state can give you the same levels of productivity as high pressure states, and even higher, because you're more inclined to do it. You're not even more inclined, you're really inclined to do the things that you need to do that are in front of you. So figuring out how you're intrinsically motivated and not being afraid to show up in that way, that authenticity, that's going to accelerate your leadership in the long term, because again, that time quality is going to be optimal, right? We're all given the same amount of time, but if you can increase the quality, you can increase the value that you create through more ideal productivity. And additionally, you're going to attract people to you that want to do the same thing and want to work in the same way or in different ways, but want that same kind of outcome in terms of experience and actual tangible outcomes from the things that we create. And they're going to be happy to participate. So if you can set that example and you operate from that place of intrinsic motivation, it's kind of also intoxicating to the others around you. And if you can pair that across your team with how others are intrinsically motivated, and you learn how to allocate based upon that, you can really leverage different motivations to create an expedited, significant outcome. All right, so a little bit more in terms of the definition of intrinsic motivation. Just to repeat, it is that energy that naturally springs from ourselves because how we work in work and in our careers, regardless of our jobs. Like I already stated, we thrive when we have that opportunity to bring that intrinsic motivation as part of our work we do. That method of working enables us to really thrive. And to move this concept or this definition to an example, no matter what role I am in, I love to build creative solutions, especially from complex challenges. I love to synthesize information from multiple perspectives and dimensions across a large scope to solve a challenge and ultimately deliver elegant and simple solutions for realizing the opportunity, overcoming the gap, or resolving the challenge. And if it were designing a website for someone and wanted to create something inventive that would create a great outcome for them, or I was helping an employer start a business and grow the business, these are the aspects of myself that when I can tap into, they really motivate me. And you can apply your intrinsic motivation to any function of your job. You just have to learn what it means to do that, and specifically in that function. So how do I understand what I am intrinsically motivated? So as an example, how can I understand that? How do I know what my intrinsic motivation is? And there's a simple way to do that, which is derived from a framework. Remember, frameworks are important because it enables us to stand on the knowledge and the experience of others, those giants before us, to accelerate our own success. And you're going to develop frameworks that you can share with others that are going to help to amplify their success, which in turn amplifies yours. And we will talk about that later in the program. So this is one framework that I like, and you can delve into it even further at a website called howtofascinate.com. And this is one approach that I use to help me to understand what really and practically intrinsically motivates me. So over 2 weeks, I will document all the things I enjoy at work and don't enjoy and why. And for each of those items on the list, I will ask myself, when I did or did not do these things, did I have a fear or did I have a sensation of protecting myself? So I'm assessing what I naturally like to do and what I don't like to do, and my authenticity around that. And then if I did seek to protect, defend, hide, or prove myself, then this is an indicator of inauthenticity. So essentially, I was like not honoring the intrinsic motivation, whether it was something I was intrinsically motivated to do or not. And then I took an inauthentic action. And if any of these items created like that energy or that flow, that timelessness, because of a dramatic increase in time quality, if that happened when I did these things, then these things are the things that intrinsically motivate me. And then from these lists, I will take the time to reflect on what I have written and define the 3 methods of how I work that are authentic and that are intrinsically motivating. So when I'm true to myself, both from the things that really drive me and also by honoring that, that is what really gives me that kind of flow state motivation. So what this does not mean is that it doesn't mean that we cannot avoid our responsibilities as leaders because we feel it doesn't intrinsically align to our motivation. What it does mean is how can you leverage to some degree your intrinsic motivation as part of that responsibility. You may not always be able to do it 100%, but if you can get a degree of it for that specific responsibility, you will likely be more likely or more probable to do the behaviors for that responsibility. Okay, so the next type of sustainable motivation, and I'm not going to invest the amount of time I did previously on the other areas. There's been a lot of stuff written about goal setting and how to do that. And I'm not going to necessarily tell you the formula for setting goals. If you like to create SMART goals, that's a pretty consistent and reliable form. It's really a quantified measure of goal setting. But the main point here And where this fits in the whole behavioral formula is this is essentially the target of our behaviors and our habits. And those aspirations and goals that we set could be for ourselves, as well as for our team members, for broader initiatives across our organization. And it's something that I do to remind myself about these things more generally, and honestly, something I tell my children every night. I'll say to them, you can be anything that you want to be in the world, just become it. So that means the aspiring to be it. It isn't necessarily the goal of becoming it, because what does it really mean to become the thing that you aspire? It really means that you are living it. So it's kind of like this circular thing. So I will say to myself, I will say to my children, and some people that I've mentored and managed some form of this, like be your aspiration, right? Just live that. And their goals are like a quantified measure of the aspiration. It is some kind of indicator that you are reaching the aspiration. So we will go a little bit further into what are the right aspirations and goals to set in the strategy week that is coming up. All right, so let's talk about values and let's talk about purpose. Like, number one, purpose is an interesting question. I think we can live our lifetime and feel like we never really understand what our purpose is. So that's a very deep question. My goal is not to answer that question today, but help to build a little bit more of an understanding and how values help to shape how we are living our purpose. So values, the way I look at them, they're essentially boundaries for what decisions I make and what actions I take that help me to fulfill that purpose. So as an example, I have a specific purpose for what we're doing here that I explained on day one of the program. I really want to make mentorship more accessible and available to more people. And I feel that structured approach can do that. And I feel that people can be accelerated faster by being aware of these types of things that it took me many years to understand and get access to and invest a lot of money in. So for me, that's my purpose here. So my values help me to choose the actions that align to that purpose, and also for me to deliver those actions in a way that aligns to who I am and what I aspire to be. So at the end of the day, the purpose is like that big why for all the decisions that we make. So again, for me, the purpose specific here is to make mentorship more accessible, because I'd like to have a broader impact on the world. And I believe that leadership can do that. That's my big why here. And my purpose is ultimately the direction, and the values that I have are those bumpers that keep me on the path I want to take to get there. So when you're defining your purpose, do not do it outside of defining your values, because you will find that your values will help you to understand not only how to achieve your purpose, but how you need to achieve them to really aspire to that purpose, to achieve that purpose. Because if you do something in a way that you're not comfortable with, that goes against who you are, that will not be a purpose fulfilled. Okay, so let's take a deeper step into values and purpose. And there's a resource here that I would recommend. So, why are these things important? At the end of the day, if you look at your decision-making as a framework and you see the values that you have, and you've done that work beforehand, it's gonna be a lot easier to make decisions. You can take any decision in your career and your life and your job, and you can say, does this decision align to ultimately my purpose? And does it allow me to do things in a way that will be meaningful to me and ultimately not destructive? And if that answer is no, I should really honor that. And if I don't, I'm deceiving myself. And this is a fascinating concept. This is a concept that I learned about and implemented, and in fact was so intrigued and moved by that I actually took a certification course at multiple levels to be a certified trainer in how we deceive ourselves. And I strongly recommend that you take a look at this book called Leadership and Self-Deception. It talks about how, as leaders, that value and purpose, we sometimes not honor it. And we create this series of justifications why it was okay not to do that. And when we do that from a leadership perspective, we are actually influencing others to create similar boxes around themselves, so their justifications for not honoring their own purposes, and then how that can dramatically shift the culture of an organization in a negative way. And when we talk about as an objective for this program, leadership opportunities and exemplary accomplishments, that can significantly decrease the odds of that. And that is a compounding exponential effect. And it's very important to be aware of your values and purpose and honoring them. And when you don't do it, being honest with yourself and not creating these judgments and justifications that explained why you deceived yourself. So I strongly encourage checking out the book, Leadership and Self-Deception, developed by a management consulting firm called the Arbinger Institute. So if you may have a unique purpose for each role you play in your life. So I gave an example specifically as my role as a leader. And you can have many roles in your professional life and your personal life and your life as a whole. And most values will be consistent across the roles. And generally values will, within each role, will not be at odds with each other. So if one of your values is to be honest with yourself, whether you're a parent, whether you're a child or you're a leader, it's highly unlikely that you would move away from that value because of a specific role. Let's move on to the next topic, which is our action items. So I covered a lot today. I recommend that you go back and look through what was covered. Again, these are different types of sustainable motivation that I regularly implement in order to increase the M in that BMAP formula by BJ Fogg. You can find other methods for sustainable motivation. Again, the point here is to find the thing that works for you in this area and to leverage it on a consistent basis. So speaking of leveraging and putting things into action, the action item for today is to, and the form listed here, number 2 will help you do this, to choose that sustainable motivational technique, whether it's one of the ones I shared today or another one you prefer or another one that you find after being possibly inspired by this conversation to look for other forms of motivation. And then go through the form, because the form is going to help you just to understand what a potential habit in this area could be for developing this kind of motivation. And then immediately apply it. Apply it. This is really important. If we don't apply things that we learn immediately, we decrease the odds of them being incorporated into who we are and how we work. And then finally, reviewing the resources. So I mentioned Lifebook, check that out. How to Fascinate, check that out. That can help you to understand your personal brand and what it means when you are intrinsically motivated. And then finally, values and purpose and honoring those things. And what it means when we do and we don't do that. Check out Leadership and Self-Deception. So we covered a lot today. We covered part 2 of motivation. Tomorrow, we're going to move on to the A in the formula, the accessibility piece. And we will focus there on how to make things easier so that we increase the odds of completing the desired behavior that leads us to our goals and the aspiration of our goals. All right, take care.